And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 98. This afternoon. It's tonight if you're in Asia. It's this morning if you're in the Americas. This afternoon if you're in the UK, Africa or Europe. I'm going to be talking about the notion of cropping images. And let me see, let's just pull that down and show you what I mean. So basically, there's a whole bunch of different ways you can crop an image. And for that, there can be practical reasons for doing it, and there can be aesthetic or narrative reasons for doing it. So I'm going to address both these concepts. I talk an awful lot about pretty much every single podcast I've done over the last nearly 2 years. I talk about cropping. So I thought I would revisit this and actually just dedicate a bit of extra time to it so that everybody's a little bit clearer about it. Additionally, once I've talked about that, we're going to move on to the critique section. I've had 3 people send in images for critique this week. Yadan has sent in this photo. They're not totally sure. This is the crop that they've done. They've sent me the original as well, looking for a bit of feedback on some ways they could have done that differently. Similarly, Jeeva has sent in this image, is looking for more bits of feedback. And Robert, who was in Paris last weekend, in fact, who took this photo, which is actually, if we're talking about cropping, is very, very cropped in from the original photo, which he has sent us. So we're going to be looking at that and doing that one as well. So that's what we're going to be talking about. We're here live on YouTube. If you're here, leave me a comment, let me know where you're from, let me know what the weather's like. It's pretty good outside today. Yeah, that's us. So, here we are. Like I say, live on YouTube. I can see we've got some comments already, so let's take a look. Oh, Meg says, good afternoon, everyone. Pat says, hi, Meg. And presumably hi, everyone else as well. Another lovely day in Somerset. Law, L'_OR says hi. Well, hello, Law. It says hello from France. Excellent. Welcome. Bonjour. Maggie says hello, everyone. Jackie says hello there from South Africa. April says hello, everyone from Long Island, New York. Rosemary says, good morning, everyone from Washington State. Good to see you all. John says hello from Ohio. April says bonjour, Law. Nuria says, hi, everyone from Exmouth. Been self-isolating for a few days after testing positive. Typical just after the COVID restrictions lifted. Well, I hope you don't have the symptoms too badly, Nuria. Wishing you all the best for that. Right. Okay. So, like I said, what we're going to talk about today is the notion of cropping photos. Now, like I said, cropping is actually my very first podcast. If you go way, way back to podcast number 1, it's how I opened this whole kickstarted this whole podcast series with the notion of cropping, because I think it's the very first port of call with pretty much any kind of editing. You take your photo, and the thing is how does it fit? Is it going to fit if you are going to be producing it in a very specific place, like on a Facebook banner, on the cover of a magazine, printed on a postcard? Then it becomes really critical that you get the crop right. But also, how you crop it can have a profound impact on the narrative, on the story that you're wanting to tell. You can either increase and intensify the narrative of the photo, you can diminish it if you get it wrong, or you can change the narrative entirely depending on what you leave in and what you decide to crop out. So that's really what I wanted to talk about. There's a Lisa Vasilenko says, hi from sunny Madrid. Welcome, Lisa, glad you could make it. Laura says, sunny here, and it's sunny in France. Brilliant. Okay, well, sounds like most of those in Europe are getting good sun. What's it like in South Africa there, Jackie? Of course, it's middle of winter there, while it's... it's middle of summer there. That's right. Yes, while we're in the middle of winter here. Trying to get my southern hemispheres and northern hemispheres sorted out. Okay, brilliant. So what I'm going to do then, let's bring up an example photo. So one of the photos I wanted to which I used before, but I think it's a good one for talking about cropping, is this one. Now, this was a photo I created for a band called Cafe Largo. talked before about the story behind it. Anybody's really interested, I think there's even actually on my YouTube channel, if you go back, there's a channel which says behind the scenes, not a channel, a playlist rather, behind the scenes playlist. You can always check this out. You can go and find actually a little kind of 2-minute behind the scenes video of the making of this photo. But the thing about this photo was, it wasn't just a case of creating an interesting image of them down on the thing. There was a very specific understanding that this photo was going to be used in a number of places. And so this affected some of the decisions I made when taking this photo. So, like I said, cropping can really be kind of taken on 2 levels. There's the practical level and there's the kind of aesthetic or the narrative level. So what I want to talk first of all about is the practical level, because it's really an important part of, are you designing this photo, if it's going to be fitting on a magazine cover, how is that magazine cover typically laid out? Is it going to be fitting on a CD? Is it going to be going on a poster? Is it going to be going on social media? And then social media varies. A Facebook banner is quite different to an Instagram post. So in that situation, what I did here is, this photo is taken with quite a lot of surround, more surround than I would normally do. So probably the best thing to do here, let's open this in Photoshop and I'll show you what I mean. So here's our kind of the full-size photo uncropped. Now, if I was just wanting to present this photo as a photo without worrying, I wouldn't have that much space around it. I want to kind of pull in a bit, make sure we're getting a bit more of the story. We don't need all this gap to the right of the plant. We don't need so much gap to the left of the dancers. So I would pull that in, probably something like that. Maybe pull that up a little bit. Leave it. I want a little bit of that reflection left in the sand there, and that's probably how I would present the photo if I was generally maybe making a postcard out of it, or if I was putting it up into a competition, or I was framing it up. So the question is then, with the crop, what happens if, could I come in closer? Well, actually I probably could. I mean, maybe if I sort of bring it down a bit, I could sort of maybe take it down to the top of the shaker here. Maybe I don't need the whole of that plant, I just need enough of that plant to know that it's there. We want to make sure that the heel isn't sticking out, isn't missing in the sand here, in which case we can kind of pull this up quite close here. And we can do that. And what does that do? Well, that contains the story. It does mean we're kind of missing out a bit on the reflections and stuff. It feels a little bit squeezed in for my feeling. So really the general sense with this is, when you start to crop, play. Crop in a bit, crop in a bit, crop in a bit more until you think, no, I've kind of gone too far. And then of course we have the wonderful fact, Control Z, undo. The undo button, the wonderful thing about digital photography rather than with analog photography and in the darkroom, where you mess it up, you've got to start the whole printing process right again from scratch. There isn't an undo button when you go too far, but there is in digital. So here we are. We've got we've got this kind of size that I would like. So that works okay. But what happens, say, if I wanted a Facebook banner? Now at that point, actually, let's go back to the original one here, because a Facebook banner or a web banner tends to be much wider and narrower. And so, in fact, if we're doing something like that, that's more the kind of thing you're looking for. Now, let's go back to here a sec and talk about, supposing we went back with this crop, where I've cropped in a little bit closer. Now, supposing I'd actually done in camera, I'd sort of set it up something like this. Then when it comes to doing a Facebook crop, then if I've got that level of banner, there's not a lot of room to, when I do that, I've missed out a lot of the legs. I've chopped quite a bit off and in fact, actually some banners are even narrower than that, in which case I kind of end up really cropping it, and we've lost it. We've definitely lost something at that point. Whereas if we go back to the original where the photo was taken with more space around it, then it means that if we're going to do the banner, we can kind of come down to here, we can come up to here, and we've now still got all the really important bits. We may have lost some on the reflection, but we've still got the major parts that we needed. And if, for that matter, we really needed to stretch it out a little bit more, maybe we could use content-aware crop. And because the outsides aren't really very busy, then the content-aware in Photoshop will probably be able to fill in the outer edges without it looking too much out of place. And here we go, we can kind of see that that's more or less worked. Maybe not fully worked down in the little corner there, but that could be touched up easily enough. So you can see by having the extra space, it gives us the room for flexibility. So we go back here. What about the other one, the classic square crop? So if I bring this in, so we're talking roughly about 3.5 by 3.5, pretty much about that. Then again, we can just about fit a square crop into this one and still be able to get all the members of the band and even a little bit of the plant into that photo. And the square crop, of course, is going to work for Instagram, of course. It's also going to work for something like a CD cover. Additionally, sometimes, I mean, if you look on Facebook at the moment, they tend to have, let's just create an extra layer there. They are, they have a round avatar place. So if we're kind of creating a little circle there, and then let's select inverse, where are we? There we go. And say I just wanted to, let's fill that in on the outside. So you can see now that even as a circle, that's kind of working. So this is all about the flexibility. And there is one final thing to really be aware of when cropping on a practical level, and that is if you decide that you want to do, if you're actually going to be printing it up as a CD cover or as a postcard or something like that, then one of the things to really remember is in the printing process, they talk about having a 3mm bleed. Now what that is that when the printing process happens, they put the image onto they can't be guaranteed that when all these things are cut, that they're going to be cut exactly on the line you want. So they want to have a little bit of leeway, so that if they cut and it's a 1.5mm to the left or to the right, that it hasn't cut through a major piece of the photo. So it might have been that you designed this photo, or you've even got text on that photo. You never run text right to the absolute edge, because if a little bit gets cropped off, you know, it could be the difference between kimes.k, and is that .com or .co.uk? We don't know because it cut off. So what you have to do is you have to allow for an extra 3mm around the image for it to be potentially cut off without it affecting the overall design. So that 3mm bleed is vitally important to understand if you're ever going to be printing this up on something like a CD cover or a postcard. So hopefully then that gives you a sort of sense of what's going on the practical side of cropping. So let me just take a quick look, see if we've got anything else in the comments, and then I'm going to talk about the notion of aesthetic or narrative considerations when it comes to cropping. Okay, so where are we? We've got April's welcoming Lisa and says it's sunny here in New York. And Maria says she's getting better. Oh, that's good. Jackie says it's boiling hot, near 40 degrees C down in South Africa. That is warm. We do not get temperatures like that in the UK. Rosemary says, glad you're improving, Nuria. Good health to you. April says, what is 40 C in degrees? Do you mean in Fahrenheit? I'll tell you what, you can go away and look that. Just Google it, April. Just type in convert 40 degrees C to Fahrenheit, and you will find out. April has in fact actually just Googled it, just looked it up, 104. Okay, so lots of talk there. April says that is Arizona in the summer. Okay, so Rosemary says, very good tip about leaving room for the bleed in printing. Oh, Meg says, can you do a diagonal crop? Now that's interesting. Diagonal crop, kind of. Right, okay. Best way to demonstrate this then, Meg, is that it's not that you very rarely would do a diagonal crop, because paper as such and the way printed things tend to be square. I mean, but if we look back at this picture here, where essentially I've talked about like a circular crop, what it is, the whole thing is actually square. It's square on the outside, and what we've done is by darkening down the inside, we've allowed the picture to appear in a circular part. So in a way it's a circular crop, but it's not really cropped. What we've just done is darken it within the square. So diagonally then, supposing there was, for some reason, there was something you wanted to do, what you would probably do, you start off with your photo like this, and then let's get, where are we? Nope, that's not what I'm looking for. Yeah, let's do the polyagonal lasso. So supposing then, okay, forget, right. I wanted to do from there to there, come down and come up like that. And then, okay, tell you what, let's stick this in a fresh layer, select inverse again, and just fill that. So you've kind of got a diagonal crop there, but you would of course need to move it about, and again, I suppose, think about how the diagonal went in relation to where the people are, because you don't really want to cut off that person's head. You need to have the heads and faces in, and maybe you would do something like that, and then potentially crop in something maybe a little bit like that, perhaps. So that way, I suppose you're ending up, but although it's called, we're saying it's a crop, what we're doing is we're just creating a space and a border around what we want to have. There might be times when you would actually have a diagonal crop. I mean, I'm looking at that and I'm suddenly thinking you can kind of imagine a pattern on a tie, perhaps. And I suppose that sometimes you get people put pictures on plates and things like that, in which case you've got round ones. So I suppose, yes, the answer is yes. It's just slightly less usual. But if you are going to do that, then the same thing kind of applies, in the fact that the chances are you'll need to leave a bleed of some kind to have around it. In fact, actually, if I think about the idea of CDs and LPs, where you used to have the bit in the middle, then sometimes you could put a picture in the middle and you would design it with bits of writing to go on the circular part in the middle of that. Good question though, Meg. I like that. Thank you for sending that one. Thank you for asking that one. Right. Oh, April says never thought of diagonal crops. Cool. Right. Sorry. Flip back to here. Right. Okay. So that's the notion then of cropping for a practical level. So what do I mean about the idea of cropping for an aesthetic level or a narrative level? And it's about understanding then that narrative story is the crucial part of photography, and that if we think of photography as a storytelling medium, we are trying to get that story across to the viewer when we take the photo. Now, again, the example I'm going to use, I think I did use it back in the first one, but it was a good one, so I will reuse it, why not? So let's talk then about, for example, now here's an unedited photo. Now this photo I took, I don't know, probably about 12 years ago or something. It doesn't really matter. So what we have here is I'm taking a photo of Michelle playing the fiddle. And we've just got a little bit of natural daylight coming in through the window. There's a red wall over on the right side of it, where you can see it's sort of slightly behind her, but it was also over to the right, which is casting a very slight kind of red bouncing light coming back here. And we've just shoved up a piece of black fleece behind her to sort of offset that. Now, the thing is in terms of, this is uncropped, unphotographed, so you could kind of start cropping in here and create, but this is, at this point, this is about, whilst there's the diagonal of the bow, which adds a little bit of energy to it, primarily she's upright. This has a kind of stability to it. You don't feel like there's a lot of energy in this photo. So what happened then, I moved round and moved in closer. And this one is edited, obviously. But just deciding how I'm going to frame the photo makes a huge difference. Now here, it's got nothing to do with the body shape, and it's got nothing to do with the pose of the body. Everything now is about the fiddle and the face, and it's the eyes. The eyes are just drilling into you. They're absolutely grabbing you. And the fiddle, the bow kind of cuts the picture in half so that the head is above, the fiddle is below. The neck of the fiddle is driving up, straight towards the face, straight towards the eyes. So you've got this strong diagonal coming in. She's got her head tilted. There's diagonal of her arm, there's diagonal of the fiddle, diagonal of the bow. All these diagonals are really creating a huge amount of energy into it. But we're not bothering about the body. We've just cropped in close here. Another little added bonus technique, one of these things which I rather like, is echoes. And just to sort of talk about that, is if you look at like the way her hair kind of curls and flips, and you get these little bits here. I love the fact that it kind of pretty much echoes what's going on around the center part of the outside of the fiddle, or the S bits, you know. So you've got shapes. This sort of shape here repeats itself over here. And that notion of shapes repeating themselves is sometimes known as echoes in photography. So you've got that. But echoes aside, in terms of cropping, that kind of cropping in changes things. Then there's that notion of getting in closer again. So this was another photo which I, taken obviously under the same circumstances, but I kind of zoomed in even closer. Now at this point, whereas the last one, the fiddle is a major part of the narrative. It's like, you've got the fiddle and you've got the face, and they have almost a kind of equal levels of priority. With this one now, it's all about the eyes, it's all about the stare, it's all about the face. And the fiddle itself is there as a sort of like best supporting actor. It's a supporting role for the face and the intensity of it. So it should be there, it's part of the narrative, but we don't need the whole fiddle in order to get the message across. Now it's absolutely about the face. I had this photo, and then there was a magazine called Prole, which a poetry magazine, and they were looking for black and white images to have on the front of the magazine. And the other thing about that was to go back to that notion of fitting the style. The picture on the front needed to be portrait. Now, how do you turn something like this portrait as well as turning it black and white? And what I did was I took this photo and I cropped in even closer to just really intensify. And at this point, what we're doing is we're almost distilling the essence of that photo. Now we've just got the one eye, we've got part of the fiddle, we've got the bow, and everything is, and there is no background. Everything is just sort of straight in there. And black and white is changing the mood. And so you can see that the narrative kind of changes again. And so this is the really important bit, and this is really what the whole point that I'm wanting to get across, that when it comes to cropping, the thing to remember is that if you get the crop wrong, you can diminish the story. The story you're trying to tell just kind of falls apart, isn't as strong as you want it to. If you get the crop right, you can intensify that narrative. If you can crop out bits of the photo that actually are getting in the way or distracting, then you can you can intensify that narrative. Or if you crop it in particular ways, you can completely change the narrative. Another aspect, actually, just to sort of go back to this one of here, for example. I mean, one of the things that they would do sometimes, because they were a band where they did a lot of covers, they also did quite a few dances. And sometimes what they did was they actually cropped for just the two dancers. And at that point, so yeah, what I'm talking about here, so I'll just go back here, and because I realised I was telling you before I'd actually switched across, was that notion of the dancers became important. So occasionally they did a poster where they just had these dancers on here, and they would crop. So what I did was I created a crop specifically for that. The problem is with this photo now is we've got the chair sitting in. So at that point we have to do a little bit of Photoshop magic and get rid of the chair. something like that. And then, of course, we've got the reflection down there as well. So that in itself became another version, a way that this has got a different feel. This has changed the narrative from the whole one, that this is just about two dancers. This is just about two dancers on a beach. Whereas this is about the whole band. So how you crop it can fundamentally change the narrative as well as intensify or diminish the narrative as well. So that's really what I wanted to talk about. Let me just close a couple of those. Oh, Diane's turned up saying, sorry she's late. Pat says her colouring blends beautifully with the violin. That was partly to do with the way but her red hair and the sort of reddish tints of the wood were absolutely there, Pat. Rosemary says the series of violins really illustrates your point about how cropping emphasises the narrative and how changes in the crop changes the story. Excellent. Well, I'm glad that came across, Rosemary. Thank you. Okay. Oh, April says great shot. Thank you. Right. So that's the bit about cropping. I hope that's kind of got the point across in the understanding. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to move on to the critique section. And purpose of critique is for you to stick in your images and get feedback. Try and get some genuine feedback on your images. If you've got sticking points, if you've got problems where you know you're not making the most out of the photo that you've got, but you're not entirely sure why, then send me your images and I'll do my best to help. So that's what we're going to move on to now. Actually, I'll tell you what, just before we move on to that, my question of the week, I've started doing a kind of question of the week in the Facebook, on the Facebook page. There's a Facebook group, Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, for anybody who does Facebook who doesn't already know about it. Just type Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres into Facebook. You will find it easily enough. And I started doing a question of the week, and the question of the week I put in this week was, what is your biggest oh no moment when you downloaded your images and you noticed something you wish you'd realised when taking the photos? And the example I gave was, I remember very early on in my photography career, I went to do a photo shoot of it was a big family gathering. I think it was the sort of matriarch, the mother's 80th birthday. Family had come from all across the country. I think one son and daughter and grandchildren had come across from France. So they wanted a photo where, a set of photos for when everybody was together. Anyway, one of the daughters, good-looking middle-aged woman, large smile, kind of horsey grin almost, teeth coming out. Every single time she saw me with the camera, she'd quickly just touch up her lipstick. I didn't realise until I got back to the to looking at all these photos on the computer that in every photo she had lipstick across the teeth. The problem was there was no way I could go back and reshoot, and I spent days going through repainting the teeth to take the lipstick out of it. So that was one of those kind of hard lessons learned. So I was really interested to see what other stories that people had. Unfortunately, not had a huge amount. People have been fairly brief on their responses. I think John said getting the exposure wrong was what a problem that he has. And yeah, I think most of us have had that. Jax also says turning up and forgetting the memory card. Dave has talked about the camera being focused on the background rather than on the subject. I think I was kind of hoping for a little bit more story rather than, it's the bit where essentially if you were sitting in the bar, sitting in the pub, or just sitting around with a bunch of mates and you were sort of telling do you remember this terrible thing happened? I want to know the story. Send me the details. So if you get a chance this week, go back to that thread in Facebook and give me a good juicy story about the time something major went wrong with your photography. That's what we all want to know. None of us are infallible. But yeah, what was that? Oh no, please don't moment when you got back and you realised that the photos hadn't turned out the way you wanted to? What was it about and what were the consequences of it? Did have quite a fun one from John Painter, who said there's one thing he learned very early on, which was, and it's a pet peeve of his, and that's lighted exit signs. It says, in the States, commercial buildings must include lighted exit signs above doorways to meet fire codes. So every wedding, every family event, and every performance stage in a commercial building has these awful signs lurking above the heads of your subjects, ruining the mood and the lighting. I've learned to look for them and either use extreme depth of field to blur them or to try and work around them. Early on, though, I had shots ruined for the bright red exit sign coming out of somebody's head. And I think I kind of like that. I can connect with that. I think it's one of those things that we often do is when we're taking photos, we're so busy concentrating on the subject, on, you know, if it's a wedding or it's a gathering, we're so busy looking at the people that we don't notice something that's going on in the background. We've mentally filtered it out, but the camera hasn't. And then when we get back, we find these exit signs all over the place, or lipstick across the teeth. Okay, John says, when you crop a photo using less than half the original, are you not wasting pixels and interfering with quality? Absolutely you are. It is one of those things, and it's a really good point to remind me of. I did mean to mention it. Thank you, John. Is the fact that you have this problem that essentially the smaller you crop down this photo, the less pixels you have available to you. So if you consider that when you are printing something, for example, you print at 300 dots per inch. So that means for each inch square that you've got, there's 300 pixels going across. Now, if your picture is 3000 pixels wide, that gives you 10 inches of really good clear printing. However, if you've cropped it down to 1500 pixels wide, you've now only got a 5-inch picture that you can print up. And if you've taken it down to 1000, you've only now got a sort of 3.5-inch photo that you can actually print. That if you print it bigger than that, it's going to end up kind of a bit pixelated. The quality is going to start to diminish. So yes, you absolutely run the problem that the more you crop something in, the less pixels you have available to you. So the bigger you blow that up, essentially the less quality is going to be there. So whilst I would always say take the photo a little bit bigger than you need it, so you've got flexibility for when you're cropping, if you need to be in closer, get in as close as you can, and then step back a little bit. Don't rely on being big far away and then cropping right in, because you lose options with that. So yeah, thanks for reminding me of that one, John. April says, wires in a landscape that I did not see. My brain blocked it. Oh, that's such a common one. Landscapes. You're looking at this beautiful landscape and you completely miss out the telegraph wires that are kind of hanging across it. The camera picks them up. We didn't. We filtered them out. The brain is really good at filtering out what it doesn't deem to be necessary. And I think part of developing your skill as a photographer is very much about developing the eye to see again what actually happens to be in the picture and might be interfering with the picture, whether that's lipstick on a teeth or wires in a landscape or exit signs or a plant or a drain pipe appearing to grow out of somebody's ear, other things that we've often had problems with. Oh, VG's joining us from India and apologising for being late. Okay, VG, you'll just have to kind of rewind. At the end, when you get to the end of this, it's all automatically recorded on YouTube. You can always pop back and take a look at the first half where I've been talking about cropping. Okay, so now let's move on to the critique section. So we've had 3 people send in images for critique. Now, the first one is Jeeva. Now, Jeeva has sent in this image, and he didn't say an awful lot about what kind of feedback he was looking for. And I think there are... Now, first of all, I can see what grabbed your attention here, Jeeva. There's some fantastic growth, really. It looks like winter growth, maybe there's bits of ivy coming up, but there's all this other stuff, all these kind of roots and branches and what have you that are all completely wrapped around this building. Now, I'm presuming that this is winter. Yeah, it looks like there's a tree branch hanging down here without any leaves on. So it might be that if you went back at a different time of year, that this would be kind of absolutely full of growth and bright green. It might even be bright red in the autumn as well, which could be interesting. So I can see that that's kind of, and then it's a kind of interesting shaped house. It's got shutters on the window. There's some interesting bits going up here in the loft part, I think. But I think there's a couple of things to think about here, Jeeva. Let's first of all open this with Photoshop, because the first thing that strikes me with this, just close that Cafe Lago one, is, and this is a problem that we talked about last week with another one that you sent in, which is it's tilted, and there's not an obvious reason for that tilt. Now, you can kind of need to straighten the horizon, or more particularly straighten the verticals, because you've taken this at a slight angle. If we were to straighten it so that it, say, was sitting straight with the guttering at the top here, we can see the whole building looks like it's tilted over. So what we really need to do is we need to make sure that the verticals are straight, so that, see these lines here, so the uprights of the window and the uprights of the door and that upright of the corner of the building, make sure that that's on a hard vertical. And if that's in a vertical, then the brain fills in the rest of the details already. So if we crop that, we can automatically see it's a slightly better shape. The next thing is the colour. And you've got this really odd yellow colouring to it, which I'm not sure, you haven't given me any real instructions as to why you did that. But for me, it just kind of makes it look a little bit sickly. If I kind of just do an auto colour on something like that, that looks a little bit more natural, I think. So kind of going for a natural feel, I think, works a little bit better. But I think if, in particular, well, those are kind of just getting it started a bit. I think part of the thing here is, and it's tying in with everything we've been talking about, which is the notion of the crop. What is it you're really trying to capture here? And it feels like you kind of, either it's about the whole building is a really interesting shape, in which case you need it to be further out. You know, there are some interesting bits going up in the roof here above the gutter line. So, but that's all been cut off. We're not really sure what's going on. So you've cut that out. You've also cut off the door, you've cut off the driveway. So it's obviously not part of the problem here then that, oh, sorry, mouse is playing up here. So you've cropped in on the building, so we're not getting a sense of the building. So if it's about the growth, if it's about this, we're also maybe a bit too far away. I mean, there are some really interesting shapes. And if we zoom in here, for example, you know, I love that curve here, the way and these shapes that are running through here. So you could have zoomed in and cropped that if you wanted to have the growth around the window. I mean, I think something like this becomes interesting. So you've got the window, but you've also got all this fantastic growth all around it. So I think really this is one of those cases where, as is so often the case, either you want to be further out to make sure you're getting a sense of what you know, you're photographing the whole building, or if you're going for a detail, you need to be further in. So really it's about understanding, and it's one of these things I've said before, but we'll say many times again in the future. At the point you're taking the photo, you have to ask yourself, what is it that's really grabbing my attention? What's the story? What is it I really want other people to see when I show them this photo? Are you wanting to show them the whole building, or are you wanting to show them the incredible plant life that's on the building? And where's the balance? Maybe you need to take 2 or 3 photos. But if you just want to have that plant life, but you need to have the hint that it's a building, then actually just the window with all the stuff around it is enough for us to know it's a building with all these branches and roots and everything on it. If you want to have the whole building, then you need to step back out further so we can see the building and how it grows. This is a kind of in between, not close enough in, not far enough out, and it's a common problem I think that we have, where we're trying to sort of do 2 things in one. Simple thing is, do 2 photos. Do a photo where you pull back out and have the whole building. Do a photo where you're close in and you've got the plant life that you want. So I hope that helps. I hope that gives you a few ideas, Jeeva. VG says, oh, I wish I could see the whole building. Lovely location and a great catch. Pat says, is that a painting to the right halfway up? Painting to the right. No, I don't think it's. I think that probably is. It's either a window or skylight of some kind. That's a reflection. I mean, I must admit, yes, there's a slight kind of Turner-esque level to it, but I think that's all reflections of the growth that are happening in probably a slightly stained window, and maybe reflections of the sky or even the buildings across the road. So yeah, hopefully that gives you your answer, Pat. Well, Rosemary says, I'm guilty of the neither close up nor far enough away too often. Yeah, I think it's something we all tend to do, but this is the point of these podcasts is that I kind of gives you that, hopefully opens your eyes to that idea. April also says, would love to take a picture of that house. Yeah, I mean, it does look quite fascinating. Right, okay, next photo I'm going to talk about is Yadan. Now, I'm not totally sure, forgive me, it's either Yadan or Yadan. I don't know whether the emphasis is on the first or second syllable, but if you could let me know at some point. And in the meantime, I'll apologise if I'm saying it wrong. But Yadan says, I took this photo a couple of weeks ago. So let's take a look at this. I was facilitating about indigo blue colour of mountain and lake. Is the beauty that I want to capture. I like the colour and light after editing it. There are key points I want to show in this photo, but I'm not sure about the content and layers. I feel there is too much. Could you give me some advice how to make it better? Right, okay, so what we've got here is we've got a lake in the foreground, we've got some buildings in the middle, and then we've got a bit of mountain disappearing into the snow at the top. Now at this point, I think the editing kind of feels like it's very kind of compressed in. There's a lot of harsh, we're not really making out a lot of detail in here. Now, fortunately, Yadan sent in the original. So let's just open this in Photoshop and actually see what we've got. So here's the original. And what we can see is that there's this huge mountain behind. And so we're into a number of things. So first of all, let's just zoom in. Now, one of the key things we find when we zoom in here is it's not in focus. This is really quite blurred. And that is immediately hampering your editing possibilities. If we're looking here, now this is small, we're just looking at a small screen. Some of you are looking at this on a tablet or computer screen or maybe even your phone. It looks kind of okay at this distance. But if you were to print this up, then what you would notice is all these buildings are out of focus. Now, if you consider the fact that this photo is about the buildings on the edge of the lake with the mountain behind, then the buildings are the really important part to actually have in focus. Now, if we look at closely here, we can see it's out of focus there. If we kind of come down, we notice it suddenly starts to get sharper here. So what's actually happened is just in the foreground, you're focused on the water. So if there was a little boat in the foreground just down the bottom here, that would then be in focus and everything else would be out of focus, but there isn't. You've managed to focus on the water in front. So the first thing you need to make sure if when creating a photo is what is it you're taking a photo of, and is that bit in focus? And in fact, interestingly, David talked about earlier, I said he was thinking about taking a photo of something and I think it itself wasn't in focus, but the background was. In this case, you've done it the other way around. The foreground is in the lake is in focus, but actually what you were wanting to focus on isn't. So let's just open this in Photoshop for a moment then, and then we'll just close that one from Jeeva. So you have, like I say, you've immediately limited what you can do with this. Now, I would say you're part of the problem with your original crop, let's just close that, close this, is you're focusing on the town here, but we're not seeing much of it. It's very, very dark. We're also missing the fact that there's the height of the mountain. You've cropped out the mountain. We don't really see much of that there. I think in terms of crop, I'd be much more tempted to just bring in, we don't need all that sky, but just bring in, say, the tip, so there's a little, we can see the top of the building like that. Maybe you don't need quite so much lake, and then depending on which bits of the building you want to kind of maybe come in from the left or the right, depending on which bits you feel are most important for your crop. But maybe something like that gives us this slightly better sense of the fact there's a lake, then there's the building, then there's the mountain behind. And then if we take that into Photoshop, perhaps to make sure we draw our attention a little bit more into the middle, perhaps we would give it just a little bit of a vignette, and that might darken the sky a touch as well. And then perhaps if we pull down the highlights a bit, bring up the shadows a little bit, and then play with the clarity and the texture, that kind of will help sharpen it a little, gives a little bit more detail, something like that. The colours are fairly, muted, but then I think that's part of it, part of the, you're talking about a winter landscape. You can, if you want, push the vibrance, but yeah, I tend to kind of feel that's maybe overdoing it. So you can nudge it a little bit, but I think you've kind of got to be a little bit careful with that. Colour balance, not sure. Yeah, maybe a little nudge to the right, slightly like that. And then we've kind of got this look. Now, having sharpened it a bit, then I think we can make a little bit more sense of the buildings here. They're still, if we go in full amount, they are still quite out of focus, and I think it's a real shame, but I think that getting them in focus would have made a huge difference. Again, it's another one of these where this whole photo could really be about the buildings, and I think if you'd crop this in a different way, what you would do, if it's really about the buildings, you need just enough of the lake to know that it's in front, and you need just enough of the hills behind to know that there is a mountain behind, and actually you have quite a nice landscape version of this photo, something like this, and it's about the buildings that are going on, and we can tell then that there's trees disappearing up into a mountain and that there's water in front. So in terms of cropping, that's another way you could do that. So I hope that gives you a few ideas, Yadan, but first and foremost, always try and make sure that the actual thing you're trying to take the photo of is in focus, because it saves so many problems later when you're trying to edit it. Right, okay. On to Robert now. Robert from Texas has sent in a photo, and he's sent in this one, which is kind of fun. So we've got a double bass player and a outside window. There's kind of mirror reflection there, kind of catching in. There's some scratches on the window as well. I mean, I must admit, when I first saw this, I thought this was like broken guitar strings kind of floating off, but it's not. It's actually scratches into the window. And it's kind of texture, and he's looking really cool with his sunglasses and big double bass. Now, what Robert said was, I took so many photos that I'm not sure which one to ask for critique, but I've decided on a picture of a street musician. I chose this crop because I think it tells a unique story within the photograph. I like the mirror and the rest of the shot, and the rest of the shot diminishes its impact. This is the main thing I would like feedback on. However, I'm always interested in a better way of processing colour and texture. Let me know what you think. So, what Robert's saying then is that, to go back to what we were talking about in the first half of this, the narrative side of it, there were extra elements in this photo which he felt diminished the bit of the story that he wanted. Now, fortunately, Robert has also emailed me the original photo. So what I can do now, if I just open this in Photoshop, here we can see that actually it's a huge photo. It's a much, much wider photo, and he really has zoomed in on a very small part of it indeed. So what we've got then is we've got 4 street musicians. We've got a clarinet player, we've got the double bass player, banjo player, saxophone player, and looks like we've got a dancer, perhaps a tap dancer. She's got boards there to be clicking away on. So kind of fun shot. Looks like probably, is that a restaurant in the background? Yep, there we go. It's signature dishes and all bits of food and stuff like that. So, and a very kind of mirror window display. So there's a number of different things you could have done with this before you even start. So for example, I think if you feel like flat on, and yeah, you're quite right, kind of straight on, there's not a lot of depth. It's just sort of fairly flat and they're all in a line. I think if you had moved around, so you were kind of taking it from this angle, so you're only kind of like 35 degrees onto them, and then you kind of have them in a row, kind of diminishing as they get sort of smaller in the distance. And I think if you maybe moved around to your right, if you and then you could have kind of zoomed in a bit and maybe had a little bit of the saxophone or the banjo player just kind of coming out, a little bit of the dancer. I think there could have been a lot of interesting ways of changing the angle, just changing the angle from where you're taking the photograph. Now, we can see then as well that you have really cropped in a lot. So let's just open this here. and have a think about what you've done with the crop. So essentially what you've done is you've decided that this is the interesting bit and cropped. I'll just see how well that actually yeah, that's not bad going actually. I think I've got more or less what you've got there. So that's what you've cropped in. Now, when you have cropped this, to go back to John from Ohio's point, is we are also at a kind of critical danger level that if you wanted to print this, you no longer actually have that many pixels to play with. Whereas your original, if I just go to image size on this, is 8,000 pixels across by 5,000 pixels high at 300 dots per inch. That's big. That's because you've got your big R5 camera. So 45 megapixel camera, some photo, something like that. Whereas when we go to your crop, your image size is now 1,200 pixels. So if you were printing at 300 dots per inch, you've got a 4-inch photo. Now, you might be able to stretch that a little bit and maybe make that 5 or 6 inches. You could possibly get a postcard out of it, but you go any bigger than a postcard and you've then lost detail. You know, at this point, because, you know, if we start zooming in, sooner or later, the whole thing does become pixelated. And the larger you make it, the more pixelated it's going to become. Now, that's fine. Now, what I would also say, though, is in terms of crop, you've talked about the story, the bit that you found interesting was double bass player. And I'm kind of thinking, now, part of the thing with your crop here, if we go back to here, yeah, I like the reflection, I like the double bass. You've cropped off part of his hand here. And I kind of feel like if you're talking about the double bass player, you either want to not have the hand, and I'll come back to that, or you want to have more of the hand. So in terms of the crop, if we come here and just go back to open and shrink that back down again, I'm more tempted to say, well, okay, now you do have a problem with the fact that if we try and include all of him like that, well, I mean, that's not bad. We're getting a bit of the other person. Maybe we don't really want that. Maybe we're kind of getting into a point of having to play around with Photoshop to get rid of them. But you kind of feel, okay, where's the story? And we've talked before, we've talked earlier about the idea, do we need to get in closer for the story? And you clearly feel we do. But I was worried about this cropped out hand. So let's take this a little bit, let's take this and then say, well, okay, what we're going to do is let's crop this up, but keep that hand in. Okay, rather than cropping it there, let's just kind of keep it in a little bit, in which case we want a little bit more space. And maybe if we make this sort of slightly more square, let's say, so we're doing something like that. Okay. Now I think that becomes, so, or maybe we don't want this completely square actually. I think tell you what, let's pull that up. Maybe if we sort of had that there. Now, remember what I've said before when cropping, don't crop through a joint, don't crop through the knee, don't crop through an ankle. If you wanted that, you wouldn't crop through the ankle, you make sure you get the feet in. If you wanted here, you either cut through the middle of the shin or through the thigh. So we'll cut through the thigh, maybe just leave the little bridge of the camera here, the double bass there. We can crop this in, maybe just take it right to the edge of that guy's elbow there, pull this one in a little bit more, and I think you've then got that. And then it's fairly easy just to take out the little elbow there. And I think you've got quite an interesting one here. And what I do quite like about this as well, if we're playing with it, is as a little extra, we can see there's a face here, which is either somebody taking the photo, maybe, is it you, reflected, or is it somebody on the other side of the window that's just catching up? But I think that's a reflection of somebody in the window there, which just, I think, adds a kind of fun little bit of extra. And then if you're wanting, at this point, we can go in and we can do the usual bits of edits, whereby, you know, what we do is maybe just bring a little bit of vignette in, take the highlights down a little bit, maybe bring the shadows up, play with the clarity, and you kind of end up with something like that if you wanted. A little bit of texture. And I think that becomes quite an interesting photo. And I think you've got in a way, you've got more narrative with that by having the length of the double bass. You've got his hand coming round. We've got this little bit of reflection there. Whereas this, I feel, you know, for what you've got, you've kind of missed this. The other way, again, is to go in even closer. And I think at that point, whereby if we're talking about your photo like this, where you've cropped the hand, let's take out the hand completely. And let's say really what the interesting bit of this story is. We can take this down just to the very top of the double bass. Maybe bring this over a little bit. Take that up. Again, we don't want to crop that line of the elbow. We just want to be kind of... So something like that, maybe. Let's just take it... Actually, I'll take it down just a fraction. Like that, I think. And then I think now we've got quite an interesting photo. And what I quite, in fact, oh, no, maybe if we're going in this close, maybe we don't need the top of the cello, the double bass. We only need enough of it to know that it is a double bass. And let's come in even closer. Let's kind of take this up so we're kind of cutting through here. We maybe don't need as much of that. We can come a little bit here. Then we've got his eyes on this kind of line of third here. And I think that makes an interesting one. And what I really quite like about this is the sense that you've got the hand coming down here, and you've got the back of the hand in the reflection there. So it is really like having two people, or it's like somebody with four arms and two heads kind of playing out of the same thing. So I think if you're wanting to get in, you can get in even closer like this, other than the fact, of course, that we have now lost more pixels and you don't really have the room to print it up. But as a web photo, as something to be going into Photo Crowd, Guru Shots, one of these online web competitions, you've got enough pixels to get away with it because, of course, you started off with so many. But if you wanted to print this, that would have been no good. You would have needed to zoom in with this with a bigger lens in the first place. So whether you're going for that or you're going for the more kind of full length or 3/4 length, where we're, yeah, something like this, I think, yeah, or the edited version like that. I think, you know, that's, you know, one of those two. Is that one or that one, I think, is probably one of the other alternative crops you could go for. So, hope that makes sense, Robert. Right. Okay, we got a few more comments. Robert says, I hope you and Anne, sorry, Rosemary says, Robert, I hope you and Anne had a great time in Paris. VG says, that looks like the strings of a musical instrument. That's what I was thinking. Those are the scratches on the mirror. Pat says, I'm transported to Paris. VG says, lovely. And she likes the one without the crop. April says, the reflection of the musician is very good. I can see why you aimed for that guy. Rosemary says, street photography, tricky. In a perfect world for this very shot, it would be cool if you'd been 3 to 4 feet to the right, so the hand was separated from the face in the mirror. Actually, it would be to the left, sorry. Okay, well, that's it. In a perfect world, what you do is you move from side to side and take a lot of photos. And I can probably pretty much guarantee, I would guess Robert probably did do that. Where else? Pat says he chose the cool model. Yeah, get the guy with the sunglasses always. April says the original photo would look good without the poles in the yellow box. But she also likes my final crop and thinks it makes a big difference to the narrative. Oh, right. Robert has arrived, says howdy all from Tennessee, up the road from Texas. We'll have to catch up later on. I don't know how much of that you caught, Robert. Pat says, what do you capture so difficult to do? Typical Paris chic. Cool. Okay, so that was the last of the photos I wanted to talk about. So a couple of other things just before we call it a day. First of all, for anybody who's at least vaguely local or has ever been to Kirkcudbright in southwest Scotland, a wee reminder that tomorrow, 28th of February, is the closing date for the Kirkcudbright collection photo competition being run by the Kirkcudbright Galleries. If you haven't done so yet, if you have a interesting photo of Kirkcudbright that you would like to see put into an exhibition later in the year, make sure you go to the Kirkcudbright Galleries website and submit the image. or images. You can have up to 3, but the closing date is 5 p.m. UK time Monday. So, reminder of that. Now, next week is week number 99. The week after that, number 100. I will give you a very, very quick heads up for week 100, which I kind of wanted to do as a special. And what I'm going to be looking for, this is in 2 weeks' time, is your best ever photo. I want you to start thinking about the greatest photo you've got, or the photo that's given you the best feedback, the photo that if you could only ever, if somehow, years, decades, centuries into the future, somebody was to find one photo of yours and that photo represented your best work, your showcase, your showstopper, what photo would you like that photo to be? What would be your best, you consider to be your best photo, whether it's because it's won prizes, because you managed to achieve something way beyond your usual level, out of your comfort zone, all these kind of things. So that's what I'm going to be asking for in 2 weeks' time. But I will talk about that again next week. Next week, however, is episode 99, and I'm going to talk about ISO. This basically came out of, I had a question from Rosemary during the week, and she said, I've got a question for you. In low light situations, after you slowed down the shutter speed as much as you safely can, and you've opened up the aperture as wide as you possibly can, you sometimes still come up with an exposure too dark. In trying to minimise the grain or the noise, is it better to boost the ISO and get the correct exposure in camera, or keep the ISO low and then raise the exposure in post-processing? Now, that's a really interesting question, and I was going to try and answer it in this podcast, and I suddenly realised that actually in answering it, it was probably more of a 15-20 minute answer, which would take us way past the hour that I like to allot to this. And I know we're past the hour already, but not as much as it would be. So what I've decided is next week I'm going to talk about ISO in photography. It's the one that we talk a lot about shutter speed, we talk a lot about aperture. ISO tends to be the forgotten one. Generally speaking, most people put the easiest thing to do, put your camera on auto ISO and forget about it. So I'm going to drill down a little bit more detail about what it is, when it happens, what you can do about it, and sometimes how you can really play it to your advantage. But I will also try and answer this question as to, are you better off just keeping a low ISO and then boosting it in post-production, or are you better off getting a higher ISO if you have to at the point that you take the photo? So great question, and I think we're going to have real fun exploring that. There will also be the critique section as well, so make sure for next week that you, if you've got a photo that you want some feedback on, if you've got any sticking points you want to talk about, let me know, put them in for next week, and I will do my best to help with that. The following week, when we do the your best ever photo, I won't be doing a critique section, so if you don't get it in for this week, this next Sunday, then it will be 2 weeks after that before there will be another chance for that. So have a think about that. Right, I think that pretty much pulls us to the end. Oh, Jackie says that sounds like fun. And April says, Jackie, you've obviously got more than one best photo. I saw your collection, hard to pick. Actually, I will talk about this in more detail next week, but I will say that is part of this, is how do you choose one? I don't know how I'm going to choose one. I will try and choose one as well, but I think it's part of the fun of part of the interesting bit of being a photographer is curating your own photos. And if you had to pick one, if you're going to create your website and say, this is what I do, what would you want as your banner image? Okay, with that in mind, Rosemary says, interesting episode as always, very helpful. Excellent, glad you've Thank you very much to everyone who sent in images, everybody who's turned up and chatted and given feedback and questions and lots of lovely comments. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. All right, turn that one over. Take care. Cheerio. Bye-bye.